So we hear the word a lot, right? I mean, in the news, but when Article 6 of the Rome Statute was drafted, it really wasn't meant to be just a catchy label for tragedy.
No, definitely not. It's a forensic blueprint, really.
Yeah, a blueprint for prosecutors. So today we're moving past the headlines to look at what we're calling the anatomy of the term. We've got a stack of legal breakdowns on Article 6, and our mission for this exploration is to understand the 5 specific acts that actually trigger this legal machinery.
Yeah, and that incredibly high bar of intent that really sets it apart from other crimes.
Exactly. So anchoring ourselves in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, since that's our source material today, there's this nugget that I think most people miss.
Right, the specific intent, or dolus specialis, because genocide is actually defined less by the body count and more by that specific intent.
Which is wild to think about. You could have a massacre of thousands, but if the primary goal wasn't the total or partial erasure of the group itself,
then it's legally categorized as a crime against humanity or a war crime, not genocide.
It's essentially a mind-reading requirement for the court. You aren't just proving what the perpetrator did, you are literally proving what they were thinking.
Which makes it notoriously difficult to prosecute. But the law does give a framework saying this has to happen within a manifest pattern of similar conduct.
So it's a trajectory. The court doesn't necessarily have to wait for the destruction to be finished to intervene, right?
Exactly. Even initial acts in an emerging pattern can count, if the conduct could itself affect that destruction. And when the statute says in whole or in part, it raises a fascinating question.
Right, like how small can a part be?
Yeah, generally it has to be a substantial part of the group or a specific geographic pocket. But it highlights that the law is looking for the systematic destruction of a collective identity.
Not just individuals. Okay, let's get into the 5 specific acts, A through E. The first 2 are the ones we recognize. I mean, killing and causing serious bodily or mental harm.
Though mental harm is actually a big deal. It was a revolutionary inclusion back in the 1940s.
An early recognition that psychological trauma is a clinical tool for group erasure.
It moves the crime from physical to existential. But then we hit Act C, which is deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction.
The slow motion approach.
Right, exactly.
It's not a bullet, it's the deprivation of resources. Think of it as weaponizing the environment by cutting off food or medicine or shelter.
A systemic way to ensure a group eventually ceases to exist without ever having to pull a trigger.
Wow. Then act preventing births within the group, which isn't just forced sterilization, right?
No. The legal framework is broad enough to include restriction of movement, if that restriction is specifically intended to stop the group from reproducing.
An attack on the group's future.
Which leads us perfectly to Act E, forcible transfer of children. Arguably the most clinical because it targets the group's future by removing the next generation entirely.
But the legal buckets here are incredibly rigid. There's a hard line at age 18.
Very hard line.
If a child is 17 and 364 days old, it fits Act E. If they are 18, the prosecution has to pivot to a completely different act.
It really shows how precise the evidence has to be. And there's the knowledge requirement. The perpetrator must have known or should have known that the victims were under 18.
That should have known standard is huge.
Huge. It's designed to prevent willful blindness as a defense. You can't just claim you didn't check IDs while you were clearing out a community.
So why does this matter to you listening right now? When you're evaluating reports of global conflict, understanding these distinctions shifts the conversation.
It moves it from a place of pure emotion to specific legal criteria.
Right. Seeing mental harm or resource deprivation through this lens changes how we perceive the machinery of these events before they reach a point of no return.
It forces us to look for the intent behind the chaos. The knowledge requirement in child transfers, for instance, is a nuance that reflects the reality of how we hold individuals accountable during international upheaval.
It's a sobering framework, but one that's necessary for any real accountability. We've unpacked killing harm conditions of life, preventing births, and transferring children, all held together by that specific intent to erase a group.
The ultimate deciding factor.
Here's a final thought to mull over. If the legal bar for specific intent is so incredibly high that it's rarely met until after the damage is done, does the law serve as a deterrent or merely a post-mortem? Something to consider as you follow these stories on the world's stage.
Genocide. What a word, right? It carries so much weight. But in a court of law, it's not just a powerful word, it's an incredibly precise legal charge. It comes with a very specific checklist. So today, let's put on our prosecutor hats and walk through exactly what it takes to prove the crime of all crimes. And right out of the gate, we get to the absolute heart of it. That word, intent. See, it's not just about the terrible acts themselves. The entire legal definition, the whole thing, hinges on proving that specific, deliberate intention to destroy a group. If you can't prove that, you got no case. It's that simple. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the prosecutor's checklist of acts, the ones that cause physical destruction, and then the ones aimed at future destruction. After that, we'll focus on the two big requirements that tie everything together. And we'll wrap up by talking about why having such a strict definition really, really matters. All right, let's dive into the first category. We're talking about the acts of physical destruction, the most direct, brutal forms of annihilation you can imagine. So, first up, we have Article 6A, genocide by killing. Seems simple enough, right? But it's not. For a prosecutor, it's a four-part test. Step 1, you have to prove someone was killed. Obvious. Step 2, you have to show the victim belonged to a protected group. Okay, but step 3, this is the big one. You have to prove the perpetrator had the intent to destroy the entire group, not just kill that one person. And finally, step 4, this wasn't some random isolated act. It had to be part of a manifest pattern of conduct. All 4 boxes have to be ticked. And this is actually a really smart way to see how the law is built. See that pattern? The core requirements, the victim's group, that all-important intent, the wider context, they stay the same. It's like a legal template. The law just swaps out the specific act, So instead of killing, maybe it's causing serious harm, which is exactly what we're looking at next. Which brings us to Article 6B. The checklist is pretty much identical, but look at that first step. It's about causing serious bodily or mental harm, and that mental part is so important. The law gets that you can try to destroy a group without killing a single person. You can do it by inflicting such deep, lasting trauma, such injury, that it just completely shatters them from the inside out. Okay, this next one, Article 6C, is, it's incredibly insidious. This is about inflicting conditions of life that are calculated to bring about a group's destruction. Think about it. Deliberately causing starvation, denying medicine, forcing people out into the cold. And notice that word, calculated. A prosecutor has to prove this wasn't just neglect. No, it was a deliberate, thought-out strategy to destroy people by making their lives unlivable. So we've talked about acts of immediate physical destruction, but now we're going to shift gears. Let's look at acts that are aimed at destroying a group's future. These are methods designed to stop a group from ever being able to continue. Take a look at Article 6D, genocide by preventing births. There's that familiar checklist again, right? The victim group, the intent, the pattern. But the act itself, it's about imposing measures specifically designed to stop a group from having children. We're talking about things like forced sterilization, systematic rape, things done with the explicit goal of cutting off a group's bloodline. It's a kind of biological destruction. And the last of the 5 acts is Article 6E, forcibly transferring children. And what's fascinating here is that this is the only act of genocide that doesn't actually require any physical harm to the victims. Instead, it's about destroying a group by stealing its future. You erase the next generation by taking them away. And the law is super specific here. The kids have to be transferred to another group, and they have to be under 18. And that detail, that under 18 part, it really shows you how precise this law is. To make the charge stick, a prosecutor has to show that the perpetrator either knew the kids were under 18 or, they should have known. It's a way to close any loopholes. And it all goes back to that core idea. This crime is about severing a people's connection to their own children, to their own future. Okay, so we've walked through 5 different acts that can be classified as genocide, but linking them all together are 2, let's call them golden threads. These are the 2 things a prosecutor absolutely has to prove, no matter which act they're arguing. The first one, and this is the big one, is the intent to destroy. It has to be a specific intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. In legal speak, they call it the dolus specialis. And let me tell you, this is the highest bar to clear. It's what separates genocide from other horrific crimes. A prosecutor can't just show that people were killed. They have to prove that the killing was a tool, a means to an end, and that end was the erasure of an entire people. And the second golden thread is the manifest pattern. The crime can't just be a one-off, isolated event. It has to happen in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct. This is how you prove it's not just a random act of brutality, but part of a wider, systematic campaign, a policy designed to attack the group as a whole. And the law gets even more specific here, which is pretty interesting. That phrase, in the context of, means a prosecutor can even charge the very first acts in what looks like an emerging pattern. Manifest means the pattern has to be obvious to any reasonable person looking at it. And get this, the law also says that a single act, if it's catastrophic enough, could theoretically be so destructive that it creates its own manifest pattern all by itself. So, why? Why all this painstaking legal detail? Why is the definition so incredibly narrow and the bar for proof so high? Well, it all comes down to preserving the power of the word itself and making sure justice is served correctly. You have to understand, this high bar is completely intentional. The law was written this way for a reason. When you label something genocide, you're invoking the single most serious charge in all of international law, the crime of crimes. By keeping the definition so strict, the law protects the word. It makes sure it keeps its power and is only used for the very specific, horrifying evil it was designed to describe. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? I mean, we see terrible conflicts and atrocities happening all the time. Knowing that there's such a precise and high legal bar for using the word genocide forces everyone, politicians, journalists, us, to be incredibly careful with our words. Which leads to the big question. How does drawing the sharp legal line between a mass atrocity and the crime of genocide actually shape our world?
We hate the opposition party. We hate the blue party. We're going to round up every single member of the blue party, millions of people, and execute them. That is not genocide.
Under this specific international legal definition, no, it is not.
That sounds insane. I mean, you're wiping out millions of people because of who they are.
It is horrific. It would be prosecuted as a crime against humanity. It would be persecution. It would be mass murder.
Okay.
The perpetrators would likely go to prison for life, but legally, technically, it does not fit the definition of genocide.
Why? Why exclude political groups or economic groups, like if you targeted the rich or the poor?
It comes down to the philosophy of what the law is trying to protect. The drafters of the convention, they focused on stable and permanent groups.
Stable and permanent.
You are born into a race. You are born into an ethnicity. You are born into a nationality. Religion is a bit more fluid, but it's viewed as a fundamental, deep-seated identity.
Whereas politics.
Politics is viewed as mutable. You can change your mind. You can switch parties. You can decide tomorrow that you aren't a member of the blue party anymore.
So you can choose to leave the group.
You can. The law differentiates between destroying a group defined by biology or heritage versus destroying a group defined by opinion.
So genocide is specifically about protecting the diversity of human existence, like protecting the species of cultures.
That is a very good way to put it. It's about preserving the human mosaic. If you wipe out a political party, you haven't removed a distinct cultural or biological strand from humanity.
But if you wipe out an ethnic group...
that lineage is gone forever.
Okay, I get the logic, even if it feels a bit cold. So, step one, the victim must be in one of those 4 boxes.
Check.
Now, step 2, this is the big one, the mental element.
The intent.
The text repeats this phrase over and over again. The perpetrator intended to destroy, in whole or in part, that national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such.
As such. 2 very small words that do a tremendous amount of legal heavy lifting.
Let's stop right there. As such. It sounds like throwaway legal jargon, like heretofore or wherefore.
It sounds like it, but it's not.
But reading the analysis, it seems like the whole crime hinges on these 2 words.
It absolutely does. As such is the difference between a hate crime and genocide. It's the difference between mass murder and genocide.
Break that down for me.
Okay. Imagine I kill a person, and that person happens to be of a different religion than me.
Right.
And maybe I even hate that religion, but I kill him because he owes me money. Or because he took my parking spot.
That's murder.
That's murder. Now, imagine I kill him specifically because I hate his religion. I want to hurt him because he is a member of that group.
That's a hate crime.
That is a hate crime, exactly. But genocide requires something more. As such means I am targeting him not as an individual and not just out of bias, but because I'm using him as a vehicle to destroy the group itself.
Oh.
I'm killing him as a representative of the group. The ultimate target isn't the man in front of me. The target is the group he belongs to.
So the individual is almost symbolic to the perpetrator.
In a horrifying way, yes. The individual is a means to an end. The end goal is the destruction of the identity.
Wow.
The perpetrator looks at the victim and doesn't see John Smith. He sees a member of Group X, and by destroying John Smith, he believes he is chipping away at the existence of Group X.
It's purely depersonalized.
It is the ultimate dehumanization. You are stripping away everything about the person except their group label and then destroying them because of that label.
And then there's the other phrase in that sentence, in whole or in part. I found that interesting too. You don't have to attempt to destroy the entire group for it to be genocide.
No. And think about the logistics of that. Very few perpetrators, even the most powerful regimes in history, have the capacity to wipe out a group in whole across the entire planet.
It's just not possible.
If the law required you to try to kill everyone, almost no one would ever be convicted.
Because there's always someone who escapes or lives in another country.
Exactly. So the law recognizes that you can intend to destroy the group by destroying a part of it.
But surely that part has to be significant. If I kill my neighbor and I have this intent, is that destroying a part?
Well, this is where it gets tricky and where courts argue. Generally, in part implies a substantial part, the significant portion of the population within a specific geographic area, or, and this is key, a specific distinct layer of the group.
Like the leadership.
Exactly. If you target the intellectuals, the religious leaders, the scientists, the military-age males, you are targeting a part that is essential for the group's survival.
You're cutting the head off the snake.
If you cut off the head, the body dies. The intent there is clearly to destroy the group's ability to exist, even if you don't kill every single member.
It's chilling how mechanical this is. You can almost see the calculation.
You can.
We don't have enough bullets to kill everyone, so we'll just kill the ones who matter.
That is often exactly how it plays out, and the law is designed to catch that.
There's a note in the introduction of our source material about knowledge. It says something like, knowledge of the circumstances will usually be addressed in proving genocidal intent. This felt a bit circular to me. What does it mean?
It's addressing a common legal defense. In criminal law, you generally need the act and the intent, but you also need knowledge. You can't accidentally commit a crime of this magnitude.
You can't stumble into genocide.
Right. You can't say, oops, I didn't realize that by cutting off the water to this city, I was destroying this specific ethnic group. The text is saying that knowledge is bound up in intent. If you have the intent to destroy, you implicitly know what you are doing.
So if a general says, I just wanted to win the war, I didn't know it would wipe out this group, the prosecutor can say, look at the pattern, look at the outcome. You had to know.
Exactly. The court infers the intent from the knowledge of the circumstances. If the destruction was the inevitable outcome of your actions and you did it anyway, the court presumes you intended that outcome.
Okay. So we have our protected groups. We have our intent to destroy them as such. Now let's get into the actual acts.
Right.
The source lists them as Article 6A through 6E. Let's start with the one everyone expects. Article 6A, genocide by killing.
The most direct form.
But even here, looking at the elements, there's a surprise. Element number 1. The perpetrator killed one or more persons.
One or more.
One. Just one.
Just one.
I feel like if I told a random person on the street, hey, you could be charged with genocide for killing one person, they'd say I was crazy.
They would?
They'd say no. Genocide is when you kill thousands.
And this brings us back to the difference between the phenomenon of genocide and the individual crime of genocide.
Wow.
We're looking at the liability of a specific person. Let's say you have a prison guard in a camp, and that camp is part of a massive genocidal machine.
Okay.
And that one guard kills one prisoner. Just one. But he does it because he wants to help destroy the group. He does it with that specific intent.
With the mens rea.
And he does it while the rest of the camp is operating.
So he's a cog in the machine.
He is a cog. But the law says that cog is guilty of genocide. You don't get a free pass because you were inefficient. You don't get a pass because you were just a small part of the big picture.
Wow.
If you participate in the destruction with the intent, even a single killing creates liability.
That's incredibly important. It prevents the, I was just following orders, defense, or the, I didn't do much defense.
Exactly. It individualizes the guilt. You cannot hide behind the crowd. If 1,000 people each kill one person, you have 1,000 acts of genocide, not just one big tragedy.
Okay, that's killing. Article 6A. Now let's move to Article 6b. Genocide by causing serious bodily or mental harm.
This is where the definition starts to expand beyond simple biological life and death.
Serious bodily or mental harm. Bodily harm, I get. Maiming, injury, that makes sense. But mental harm, that feels harder to pin down. What does the text imply here?
It's acknowledging that you can destroy a group without physically extinguishing the lives of its members immediately.
Okay.
If you inflict such severe mental trauma, such psychological terror that the members of the group can no longer function, you are destroying the group.
So we're talking about torture.
Torture is the clearest example, but it goes deeper. Think about sexual violence. Rape is frequently prosecuted under this article.
Right.
Yes, because rape isn't just a physical assault. In the context of genocide, it is often used as a weapon to shatter the family structure, to inflict shame, to traumatize the victims so deeply that they feel expelled from their community.
It breaks the social bonds.
It breaks the spirit. If you have a population of people who are physically alive, but they are so traumatized, so mentally shattered, that they cannot maintain their culture, they cannot trust each other, they cannot raise the next generation with any sense of hope, have you preserved the group?
No. You've left the shell, but you've hollowed it out.
Precisely. The harm here is the destruction of the group as a functional social entity. The text says the harm must be serious.
Right.
We aren't talking about insults or discrimination. We are talking about grave, long-term damage to a person's faculties.
And it all connects back to that intent to destroy as such. You are destroying them as a functional unit.
Correct. It's a recognition that a group is more than just a head count. It's a psychological entity, too.
Moving on to Article 6c. This one is insidious. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction.
This is the shift from direct violence to indirect violence. This is the article for the bureaucrat.
The text uses the word calculated. That implies a plan. It implies a spreadsheet.
It implies a system. Article 6a is shooting someone. Article 6c is locking them in a room and not feeding them.
Or driving them into a desert without water.
Or stripping them of shelter in winter.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's slow motion destruction.
It is. And notice the requirement. Conditions of life. This covers food, hygiene, medical care, shelter, clothing.
The basics.
The absolute basics. If a regime systematically deprives a protected group of these basics, calculated to bring about physical destruction, it is genocide.
Even if they don't touch them. Even if they never lay a hand on them.
Yes, because the outcome is the same. The intent is the same. The method is just passive.
Or seemingly passive.
But the text sees through that. It calls it inflicting. You are inflicting a lack of resources.
Calculated to bring about physical destruction.
Yeah.
So if you just provide bad housing, that's not enough.
No.
It has to be bad enough to kill them.
Correct. The threshold is physical destruction. It's not just discrimination or poverty. It is creating an environment where death is the inevitable intended outcome.
You're weaponizing the environment.
It's weaponizing the environment against them. Yes.
That is terrifying. It allows a perpetrator to pretend they aren't doing anything. Oh, we didn't kill them, the famine did.
And this article cuts right through that defense. It says, no, you created the famine. You calculated it. This is genocide.
Okay. Article 60. We're moving further away from killing the living and towards preventing the future. Imposing measures intended to prevent births.
This is the biological dimension of destroying a group.
What does this look like legally? What kind of measures are we talking about?
Well, the most obvious ones are things like forced sterilization or forced abortion.
Right.
But it can also look like segregation.
Segregation.
Imagine a regime that doesn't kill anyone, but it separates the men and the women of a particular group. It puts the men in labor camp A and the women in labor camp B.
And just keeps them apart.
And it keeps them there for 10 years, 15 years.
You stopped a generation.
You've stopped reproduction. If you do that with the intent to destroy the group's lineage, that is a measure intended to prevent births.
The logic here is brutal but clear. If you stop new members from being born, the group has an expiration date.
It dies out. It is destruction in whole or in part, just on a delayed timeline.
This really highlights the difference between mass murder and genocide, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Mass murder is about the people standing in front of you. Genocide is about the lineage. It's about the future.
It's about the existence of the people through time. If you cut off the future, you have destroyed the group just as effectively as if you cut down the present.
It's so cold. Measures intended to prevent births. It sounds so bureaucratic.
Genocide often is. It requires organization. You can't prevent births on a mass scale without a system.
Which brings us to the final act, Article 6. And I have to say, when I read this one, this is the one that really made me stop and think.
I'm not surprised.
Forcibly transferring children.
Yes. This is perhaps the most abstract form, but also the most heartbreaking.
The elements are forcibly transferring one or more persons under the age of 18 from the targeted group to another group.
To another group, that is the key.
Why is this genocide? Nobody dies here. The kids are theoretically alive. They're being raised by someone else.
Right.
They might even be treated well by the new families. Why is this in the same category as mass killing?
Because we have to go back to what a group is. A national, ethnical, racial, or religious group survives through the transmission of its culture, its language, its identity.
The kids are the carrier of the group's soul, in a way.
Exactly. If you take the children of Group A and you give them to Group B to raise, what happens?
They grow up as Group B.
Those children will grow up as members of Group B. They will speak Group B's language. They will worship Group B's gods. They will have Group B's national identity.
So Group A vanishes.
Group A vanishes. The biological bodies survive, but the group, the entity that the law is protecting, is destroyed. It is social death. It is cultural erasure.
That is fascinating. It's an admission by the legal system that a distinct group of people is more than just DNA. It's an identity.
And if you sever the link between parent and child, you sever the link between the past and the future of that group.
There's a specific detail in the elements for 6E regarding age. Element 6 says, the perpetrator knew or should have known that the person or persons were under the age of 18 years.
Or should have known.
That's a lower bar, isn't it? Usually criminal law requires you to know facts. It requires actual knowledge.
It is a lower bar. It creates a negligence standard. It prevents the defense of, oh, I didn't check their ID. I thought they were adults.
You can't just be sloppy about it.
No. Yeah. If you are forcibly transferring people, you have a duty to know who you are moving. The law puts the burden on you.
So you can't plead ignorance.
Negligence regarding their age is not a defense if you should have known. It's incredibly protective of children.
It is. It recognizes that children are uniquely vulnerable and uniquely important to the survival of the group. So we have these 5 acts: killing, harm, conditions of life, preventing births, transferring children.
Right.
Any one of these committed with the right intent against the right group can be genocide.
Yes.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle. We've hinted at it. It's in the intro, and it's repeated in every single article as the final element. Element 4, or 5 or 7, depending on the article.
The contextual element.
The conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group, or was conduct that could itself affect such destruction.
This is the guardrail. This is what separates this crime from others.
Why do we need a guardrail?
Because without it, any hate crime could be argued as genocide. We live in a violent world. People kill people. Racists kill people.
Sure.
If a racist person kills one person of another race and they have hate in their heart, is that genocide?
Based on the intent section we discussed, you might argue yes. They want to destroy the group in part. One person is a part.
Right. But international law is meant for the gravest of crimes. It is meant to prosecute systemic threats, not isolated incidents. So this element requires a manifest pattern.
The act can't be isolated.
It has to be part of a larger wave, part of a campaign.
The introduction defines manifest, right? I remember seeing that.
Yes, it calls it an objective qualification.
Meaning it has to be visible. You can't just imagine it.
Visible, demonstrable. You have to be able to look at the situation and say, yes, this isn't just one guy acting crazy. There is a pattern here. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a reality on the ground.
And in the context of includes initial acts in an emerging pattern.
Yeah.
I thought that was a crucial note in the introduction.
Hugely crucial. Because if you had to wait for the pattern to be finished, it would be too late.
Right. You'd have to wait for the genocide to be successful to prosecute it.
Yeah, exactly. This allows the law to step in when the pattern is emerging. If you can see the storm clouds gathering, if you can see the initial acts kicking off a campaign, that counts as the context.
It's preventative in a way.
It's designed to be, yes.
But there's an OR in there. A huge or was conduct that could itself affect such destruction.
The exception clause, the lone catastrophe scenario.
Break that down.
Suppose there is no pattern yet. Suppose everything is peaceful. And then A regime uses a weapon of mass destruction on a specific group city.
One bomb.
One bomb. No pattern of previous conduct, no smaller attacks leading up to it. But the act itself is so massive, so catastrophic, that it is capable of affecting the destruction of the group.
So you don't get a free pass on the first massive strike just because you haven't done it before.
Correct. If the act is catastrophic enough on its own, you don't need the pattern. But for smaller acts, individual killings, individual transfers of children, you need to prove that connection to the manifest pattern.
It's really a web, isn't it? You can't just look at one piece. You have to look at the victim, the intent, the act, and the context.
It is a matrix. All four have to align. If you miss one, the charge fails.
And it becomes something else.
It might be murder, it might be a war crime, it might be a crime against humanity, but it isn't genocide.
It makes you realize why these trials take so long.
Years. Because proving intent and proving pattern and proving knowledge beyond a reasonable doubt, that is a high legal bar, a very high bar.
Especially the intent part. I mean, we talked about knowledge of the circumstances, but proving what is in someone's soul, that they wanted to destroy the group as such.
It is the hardest part. The text notes that the court decides the mental element on a case-by-case basis. There is no formula for reading minds. You have to infer it from their actions, their words, the patterns.
It's sobering.
It is.
So let's try to synthesize this. We started this deep dive wanting to understand the mechanics of genocide. We found that it's not just about body counts.
No, not at all.
It's about a specific target. National, ethnical, racial, religious.
Check. The four protected groups.
It's about a specific intent. To destroy them as such, to erase the identity.
Check. The core of the crime.
It covers a spectrum of acts that goes way beyond killing. Killing, serious harm, mental or physical, inflicting conditions, starvation exposure, preventing births, and stealing children.
A ladder of destruction.
And finally, it all has to happen within a manifest pattern. It has to be systemic or catastrophic.
That is the framework. That is what prosecutors have to prove.
It really changes how I'll read the news. When I see that word used, I'm going to be looking for these elements. Is the intent there? Is the pattern there? Is the group protected?
And that is the value of understanding the law. It takes us out of the realm of pure emotion and gives us a standard to measure reality against.
It doesn't make the crimes any less horrific.
No.
In fact, in some ways, seeing the mechanical definition makes them more horrific.
Because you see the calculation.
You see the calculation. You see that this isn't accidental. It is a design destruction.
It's methodical.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave the listeners with something to think about. We talked about the mental element. And you mentioned how hard it is to prove.
Yes.
The text says, knowledge of the circumstances will usually be addressed in proving genocidal intent. But it leaves that gray area.
It does. And here is the provocative thought I want to leave you with. The law assumes rationality. It assumes that we can look at an action like starving a village and logically deduce that the perpetrator intended to destroy the group.
Right. It's a logical conclusion.
But hatred isn't always rational.
No.
What happens when the perpetrator doesn't even admit to themselves what they are doing? What happens when the ideology is so twisted that they believe they are saving the world, not destroying a group?
They believe they're the good guys.
The law tries to put a box around the darkest, most chaotic parts of human nature. It tries to impose order on absolute chaos. And that is a never-ending struggle. How do you prove the specific intent to destroy when the human mind is capable of such immense self-deception?
That is a heavy thought. The gap between the clean legal text and the messy human reality.
That is where the challenge lies.
Well, on that note, thank you for guiding us through this. It wasn't an easy topic, but I feel like I understand the machinery of it so much better now.
It was important to do. Knowledge is the first step.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, I highly encourage you to read the text. It's dry, it's legal, but it is incredibly revealing. Legal elements of the crime of genocide. Go look it up. See the precision of the language for yourself.
It's worth your time.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time, hopefully with something a little lighter. But until then, stay curious and keep asking questions.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Welcome to the debate. Today we are opening the books on, well, perhaps the darkest and most complex corner of international law. We are dissecting the legal elements of the crime of crimes, genocide. Specifically, we're looking at Article 6, Sections A through E, and the text that determines whether an act is just a crime or if it crosses that threshold into the destruction of a people.
It is a heavy topic and one that gets thrown around quite loosely in public discourse. But we aren't here to talk about politics or history today. We are here to talk about the mechanics. We are looking at the specific elements of crimes that a prosecutor, actually has to prove in a courtroom to make a charge of genocide stick.
Exactly. And the text we're analyzing is fascinating because it attempts to do something almost impossible. It tries to codify the destruction of a human group into a rigorous checklist of legal requirements.
A checklist that I would argue is riddled with internal contradictions.
I disagree, but that is the central question we are tackling today. When you look at the source material, the text defining everything from killing to forcibly transferring children, what is the real engine of the crime? Is the definition of genocide reliant on the objective, visible reality of a manifest pattern of conduct?
Or is the definition held hostage by the subjective, invisible intent of the perpetrator? It's the battle between what you can see and what you have to guess. The text breaks genocide down into 5 specific acts: killing, causing serious bodily harm, inflicting conditions of life, preventing births, and transferring children. But the controversy, and where I think this legal definition struggles, is how you elevate those acts to the level of genocide.
And I'm going to take the position that the text actually solves this problem brilliantly. I'll argue that it provides a robust, objective framework through that context requirement. It relies on the manifest pattern clause to connect individual acts to the destruction of a group. It makes the law enforceable because it grounds it in reality, not just the mind of the accused.
And I am going to push back on that. I believe the definition is incredibly fragile. The text relies so heavily on the mental element, the specific intent to destroy a group as such. This creates a subjective barrier that is so high, it effectively creates a shield for perpetrators, especially in the edge cases like transferring children or imposing certain conditions of life. You're trusting a manifest pattern to do work that the text explicitly says must be decided on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so let's get into the machinery of this so we aren't just speaking in abstracts. When we talk about Article 6, we are talking about 5 distinct sections. Section A is genocide by killing. Section B is causing serious bodily or mental harm. C is inflicting conditions of life calculated to destroy the group. D is preventing births, and E is forcibly transferring children.
Right. And while the acts differ, the structure of the law is identical for all of them. And that is where the trouble starts.
See, I view the structure as the strength. In every single section, from killing to child transfer, the text requires a specific context. It's not enough to just commit the act. The final element in every single article states that the conduct must take place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct.
Manifest pattern. It sounds solid. It sounds definitive.
It is solid. If you look at the introduction to the source material, it explicitly defines manifest. Point B says, quote, "The term manifest is an objective qualification." That is a crucial distinction. It removes the guesswork. It means the violence must be visible, concrete, and undeniably present. It isn't about what the perpetrator secretly feels, it's about the objective reality on the ground.
I admit, objective qualification is a strong phrase, but you're leaning entirely on the context to prove the crime. I'm looking at the perpetrator. Even if there is a manifest pattern of violence around me, the law still requires that I have the specific intent to destroy the group.
But the context informs the intent. That's the whole point.
Doesn't. Look at the introduction again, specifically point C. It says, notwithstanding the normal requirement for a mental element, the appropriate requirement, if any, for a mental element regarding this circumstance will need to be decided by the court on a case-by-case basis. I mean, that is a massive loophole.
I think you're misreading the scope of that point. It's procedural flexibility.
I really don't think I am. The text admits that while knowledge of the circumstances is usually addressed in proving genocidal intent, it refuses to codify it. It leaves the mental connection to the context up to a case-by-case decision. So while you argue the manifest pattern is objective, the requirement to link a specific soldier's or bureaucrat's mind to that pattern is the weak link. If I'm a low-level officer acting within a manifest pattern, but the prosecution cannot prove I mentally connected my actions to that pattern because of this case-by-case vagueness, the genocide charge fails. You have a genocide without a genocide heir.
You're focusing on the exception and missing the rule. The text includes a vital bridge in introduction point A. It says the term in the context of would include the initial acts in an emergent pattern. This is a brilliant piece of drafting that you were overlooking.
How so?
Because it solves the chicken and egg problem. It allows the law to be preventative. It captures the start of a genocide. If we only relied on a fully established historical pattern, we would only be able to prosecute genocide after the group is already dead. By including initial acts, the objective framework captures the process of destruction. The pattern doesn't have to be finished, it just has to be emerging.
That concept of initial acts actually brings us to the first major structural crack I want to discuss: the tension between the manifest pattern and the singular act.
Okay, walk me through the crack.
Let's look at the final element in these articles. For Article 6A, genocide by killing, Element 4 states, the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group, or was conduct that could itself affect such destruction.
The or clause, yes. It provides an alternative pathway.
It's not just an alternative. It's a paradox. The text says you need a pattern or a single act that can destroy the group. But think about the practical reality. If there is no manifest pattern yet, let's say it is the very first initial act, the prosecution must prove that this single conduct could itself effect the destruction of a national or ethnic group in whole or in part.
Right. That refers to the potential of the act.
But how does a single act of killing or a single act of causing serious bodily harm technically affect the destruction of a national or ethnic group in whole or in part? Unless you are talking about using a nuclear weapon or a biological agent, a single act cannot destroy a group. So for the lone wolf or the initial actor who isn't using a WND, the legal definition seems to demand a physical impossibility.
Well, I think you're taking a very narrow view of effect such destruction. The text is designed to be comprehensive, not permissive. Yes, the or clause covers those catastrophic theoretical events like the use of a weapon of mass destruction, where a single act does threaten the group. But for 99% of cases, we are relying on the first half of that sentence, the manifest pattern.
But that forces you back to the pattern. You just said initial acts are covered. But if I commit an initial act, there is no pattern yet. And my single act can't destroy the group on its own. So legally, I haven't committed genocide, I've just committed murder. The law fails to catch the instigator.
Not necessarily. Emerging pattern implies that the gears are turning. It's not just one person acting alone. It's the start of a coordinated effort. The manifest qualification protects against misuse. It ensures we aren't prosecuting a random hate crime as genocide. It demands an objective scale. The law should distinguish between a hate crime and genocide. The distinction is the pattern.
But that distinction forces us back to the mind. Element 3 in every single article requires that the perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that group as such. If I am a perpetrator committing an initial act before the pattern is manifest to the world, how do you prove my intent is to destroy the group as such? You need the pattern to prove the intent, but you need the intent to define the act as genocide. It's a catch-22.
I'm not convinced it's a catch-22. I think it's a high bar, yes, but a necessary one. And if we move away from simple killing and look at the more complex definitions, Article 6C and 6D, the text actually provides the tools to solve this specific intent problem.
You're referring to conditions of life and preventing births.
Exactly. These are the silent genocides, and often the most misunderstood. Article 6C covers genocide by deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. Look at Element 4 here. The conditions of life were calculated to bring about the physical destruction of that group.
Calculated. That is a very heavy word in a legal text.
It's the key word. It demonstrates that the definitions recognize genocide isn't just immediate violence or gunshots. It's a systemic imposition. The calculation itself is evidence of the intent. If a regime cuts off water to a specific region or denies medical supplies to a specific ethnic enclave, that requires planning. That requires logistics. That calculation is the proof of the intent to destroy.
That sounds compelling in theory, but have you considered how difficult it is to prove calculation in a courtroom compared to, say, a bullet?
It requires documentary evidence, certainly.
It requires a smoking gun that rarely exists. Under 6C, you aren't just proving they starved people. You have to prove that the starvation was specifically calculated to physically destroy the group. We see governments all the time that are incompetent or cruel or discriminatory. They might cause a famine through bad policy or neglect. That's a crime against humanity, perhaps, but it isn't genocide under this text unless you prove that specific calculation.
And I would argue that is exactly as it should be. Genocide is the crime of crimes. It shouldn't be applied to incompetence. It shouldn't be applied to bad governance. The distinction lies in that malicious calculation. We cannot water down the definition to include accidental tragedy.
But the line is blurry, and it gets even blurrier when we look at Article 6D, genocide by imposing measures intended to prevent births. Here, the conflict between the act and the intent is even sharper.
In what way?
Well, Annihilate 4 says, the measures imposed were intended to prevent births within that group. So first, I must intend to prevent births. That's specific intent number 1. But element 3 still applies. I must also have the intent to destroy the group as such.
They are inextricably linked. Preventing births is a method of biological destruction. If you stop the births, the group disappears.
Theoretically, yes, but practically. Imagine a government enforcing a forced sterilization program. They don't go on TV and say, we want to destroy this ethnic group. They say, this is for poverty alleviation, or this is for population control to stabilize the economy.
That's the veil the court has to pierce.
But the text makes that veil incredibly thick. To convict under 6D, you have to prove the ultimate goal was group destruction, not just the immediate goal of birth prevention. Without a manifest pattern of other types of violence like killing, proving that a birth prevention policy is genocidal as such is incredibly difficult. The text sets the bar for intent so high that subtle, bureaucratic forms of genocide, the clean genocide, might slip through the cracks.
I think you're being too cynical about the court's ability to infer intent. The text prevents the delusion of the term genocide. If a government enforces a one-child policy for economic reasons, that is a human rights violation, but it is not genocide. The text requires that link to destruction. And this is where the context element returns to save the day.
The context again.
Yes, because it's the anchor. Element 5 of Article 6D requires the conduct to take place in the context of a manifest pattern. If there is a pattern of suppressing only a specific ethnic group's population while the majority population is allowed to grow, the intent becomes visible through the context. The objective reality illuminates the subjective mind. You don't need a signed confession when the statistics speak for themselves.
I suppose we fundamentally disagree on whether the context illuminates the mind or simply obscures the lack of direct evidence. But if we want to talk about the hardest edge case, the one that really tests this tension between context and intent, we have to talk about Article 6E.
Genocide by forcibly transferring children?
Yes, this section keeps me up at night.
I actually find 6E to be one of the clearest sections in the text.
Clear. It introduces elements that exist nowhere else. Look at element 6. The perpetrator knew or should have known that the person or persons were under the age of 18 years.
It's a necessary legal safeguard regarding the status of the victims. You have to prove they are children.
But it adds an extra layer of knowledge required for conviction. Should have known. The real difficulty, though, is element 4. The transfer was from that group to another group. On its face, transferring children is not destruction in the physical sense used in 6A or 6B. Nobody dies in the immediate act. It is social or cultural destruction.
A different group, the original group ceases to exist. That is why element 3, the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, is still perfectly applicable. You are destroying the group in part by removing its future.
I understand the logic, but consider the defense. This is where the intent requirement becomes a trap. If a perpetrator, a soldier, or a social worker claims, I moved these children from the conflict zone to a neighboring country for their safety.
The humanitarian defense?
Exactly. They admit to the act, element 1. They admit the children belong to the group, element 2. They admit they knew they were under 18, element 6. But they deny element 3, the intent to destroy the group. They claim the intent was benevolent. We were saving them from the war.
And this is why the context element is the anchor. Look at element 7 of Article 6E. The conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group. You cannot look at the transfer in isolation. If you are forcibly transferring children for safety, but simultaneously there is a manifest pattern of killing their parents or burning their villages under 6A or 6B, the humanitarian defense crumbles. The text forces a holistic view. The transfer cannot be separated from the burning village behind it.
That is true if the other acts are present. But what if the genocide is the transfer? What if the manifest pattern is solely the transfer of children, framed as re-education or safety? What if there are no burning villages, just a bureaucratic program to integrate children?
Then the pattern itself is the proof. If it is manifest, meaning objective and visible, that one group is being systematically stripped of its children, that falls under the clause conduct that could itself affect such destruction.
I worry that the mental element regarding context, that case-by-case loophole we discussed in the introduction, gives the perpetrator too much room to maneuver here. A perpetrator could argue, yes, there was a pattern of moving kids, but I didn't know the pattern was intended to destroy the group. I thought we were just moving kids to better schools. Because the text separates the intent to destroy, element 3, from the knowledge of the context, introduction, point C, it leaves a gap for willful blindness.
I think you are underestimating the phrase knew or should have known in element 6.
That applies to the age of the child, not the genocidal intent.
True, but the standard of manifest implies that the pattern is so obvious that claiming ignorance is legally insufficient. Look, the text balances the need for specific intent with the reality of systemic violence. It doesn't require a signed confession stating, "I intend to destroy this group." It requires acts committed with intent within a context that makes that intent undeniable. If you are moving thousands of children and they never return, the safety argument fails the objective test.
And yet, the text still separates them. It still creates a checklist where you can technically check the box for act and context, but miss the box for intent and walk away. That separation is dangerous.
I see it differently. I see the separation as precise. To summarize my perspective, I believe this text successfully balances the need for specific intent with the reality of systemic violence. The definitions of context and manifest pattern, particularly the inclusion of initial acts, provide the objective solidity needed to prosecute. Whether it involves killing under 6A or transferring children under 6E, the text ensures that we are looking at real, observable phenomena, manifest patterns, rather than just guessing at thoughts. The law must be anchored in what we can see. And to summarize my stance, while the elements are incredibly detailed, the reliance on a case-by-case determination for the mental element regarding context leaves the definition vulnerable. I maintain that the gap between a manifest pattern and a specific individual's intent to destroy as such remains the text's most challenging feature. It asks the court to bridge the gap between a bureaucratic or military system and the mind of a single individual. In the messiness of war and politics, that is often a bridge too far.
It is worth reflecting as we close on that note in the introduction. It says, knowledge of circumstances will usually be addressed in proving genocidal intent. The drafters knew these things were intertwined. They knew you couldn't truly separate the man from the moment.
They did, but by keeping them legally distinct, they ensured that this debate would happen in every courtroom where these charges are brought. The law requires a distinct finding for the mental element, and that is a high hurdle, perhaps too high.
Or perhaps just high enough for the gravest of crimes.
That is the question.
We leave you to consider. Is the manifest pattern enough to prove the darkest of human intentions?
Or does the strict requirement of intent protect the accused at the expense of recognizing the crime for what it is?
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.